episode 1 of Creative Adventures, the audio transcription of stevexoh's Substack thing. I think that's what it's going to be called. The truth is, I'm not quite sure what this is yet. And I just needed to get started because I found I was procrastinating so much in just even starting to record, and like waiting for the perfect moment to record. I need to work out what this is before I begin. And then I realized I don't do that in my art or other areas, or at least my visual art. I just do stuff and get on with it. So I thought I just needed to practice what I preach and start before I'm ready. So this is it. This is a thing. And where this started was I began a Substack, writing a Substack a few months ago. And that came about because I started getting a bit frustrated or a bit bored with MailChimp, which I'd been using to write newsletters for, 12 years. And MailChimp had just started adding so many features that I never used, and the price kept going up to pay for those features, that I just thought I needed to change. And it's sort of like MailChimp became just like a website editor. And I've noticed that with lots of really novel tech and apps and things, the things that I used to use, they add more and more features. And it's like the carcinisation of tech, that everything starts to become exactly the same. And if you don't know, carcinisation is a brilliant word, a brilliant idea that I learned, particularly as a crab fan. And it's an idea that everything is evolving over time, like over the slowness of evolution, but everything is evolving to become a crab-like state. And that's the end point of the evolution. Everything will evolve to become a crab. And it's called carcinisation. And that made me think that maybe that's what's happening with tech, that there's these novel, weird and wonky apps and services. And then to compete, they add in other features just like the other ones. And then before they know it, they've just all turned into the same thing, which is a long way round of saying I got bored with MailChimp and I started writing a Substack. And I really enjoyed writing again, like writing long form I haven't done for quite a long time. And people seem to like it. Like people sent me nice messages and lots of people read it. And at the start of each Substack that I write, there's a too long didn't read section. And the idea of that is just people that don't want to read the whole thing, they can have a look and think, oh, that bit looks interesting, and go to that part. And it's when I was writing one for the latest edition, I suddenly thought to myself, well, I wouldn't read this. It's too long for me. And I wrote it, and I'm interested in the content. Because the way my brain works, written words don't go in very well. And I find it hard to retain that information. I find it hard to read for an extended period. And audio input is far more preferable to me. So I thought I wouldn't read it. And there must be loads of other people out there that for whatever reason don't like reading stuff or find reading hard. And accessibility is really important to me in all elements, in all of my work. So I thought maybe I should record an audio version of the Substack and read that out. And then that struck me as bizarre because it's the other way around. And I've worked on podcasts for quite a few years. It's normally the other way around, that you record the audio and then transcribe a written version for people to read. By the way, my flat's really noisy and I'm recording right by a window, so you can hear bits of traffic and stuff going around. I just needed to start recording and not worry about spending months soundproofing. And I'm going to try and record all of this in one take as well. That's important to me. It's as imperfect as it is in one take. So ignore the traffic. And you might hear some jackdaws and crows shouting at me because they've run out of food. So hopefully they'll turn up. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So that idea of reversing the process of transcribing a podcast amused me. And I thought, where am I going to host this audio version of my Substack? Well, I might as well use a podcast hosting platform. I've got accounts with them. I can just use them. And then I thought, well, I can't just read the Substack. I don't think it will quite work for a couple of reasons. One, because stuff needs tweaking a little bit for it to work in an audio form versus a written form. And the other thing is I'm terrible with scripts. I hate reading scripts. I used to do lots of work in radio and I loved it. And it was largely improvised conversation or largely improvised sketches and things like that, or improvised interviews that had a loose structure, but within it was free. And the few times that I had a script, I was terrible. I literally froze. I become so anxious that I couldn't breathe. And it was clear that I can't just read the Substack. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I just read around it, or maybe I just talk about the stuff that's in the newsletter. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same. In fact, it's a ramble inspired by the newsletter. And then in that moment, I just suddenly thought, but that's a podcast. That's a podcast. What I've just done is accidentally designed a podcast. So it might be, I'm not sure, but that's what this is. It's an experiment. I'm going to see what happens. And I'll do one for each episode of the Substack. And eventually they'll catch up. Like, this is episode 1, but there's already been 3 editions of the Substack, which is doing my head in at the moment. It's like, what happens in the written edition number 3? I mention this podcast, but this is edition 1 and I'm mentioning it. So I don't know. Somehow they will sync up in the future, but that's my problem, not yours. And I'm also excited at experimenting with this. I've been quite bored recently. I have a weird relationship with activity and stuff to do. It's like when I'm not busy, I crave it. And when I'm really busy, I crave inactivity and space. And it never settles. I mean, maybe everyone's like that. I experience it as a really pronounced thing. So to have something like this podcast or this, whatever it is, as an experiment is exciting. It's exciting. And I think I was a bit bored because I travelled a lot back in June, and I don't travel lots anymore. I haven't really since lockdown. That type of work has never really come back. But I travelled a fair bit, and I went to Barcelona and did my bingo machine talk for a big entertainments company, which was brilliant. It's my favourite work to do that. And I went on a terrible, terrible retreat. It really was bad. It had the opposite effect on me that a retreat would. I came back more stressed and depleted than when I went. And then I went to central Spain, near Avila, to my friend Rob Poynton and Alex Caraby's event called 3D Yellow, which I describe Yellow as they describe it as an alternative learning community, which is an accurate description, but it's much more than that. There's so many things on LinkedIn that say this is an alternative way of learning, and they're just exactly the same. But what Rob and Alex run is fundamentally different and weird, and I like being part of that community. And the Yellow 3D is when people come together in central Spain with a loose structure, but not really an agenda, and just experiment. And when I went, I decided I'd set myself the target of choosing to do less, to not participate in lots of things, which might sound a bit weird, but normally I'd go and I'd take part in everything that everyone's running, and I'd run a load of stuff. So for me, the experiment, the invitation from Yellow to experiment was to choose not to participate. And that meant that I had lots of spontaneous conversations with people, that I'd just be sitting around on the lawn, playing the guitar, painting a bit of wood, laying in a hammock or something, and people would walk past and join me. And a number of those conversations, I noticed I ended up talking about an old article that I wrote probably about 7 or 8 years ago that was called 4 Lightly Held Philosophies for Living a Creative Life. And I originally wrote it for a book, a feature in a book, and I'd sort of forgotten about it. I hadn't really spoken about it and hadn't written about it since. But I mentioned it recently on Helen Jane Campbell's Creative People podcast. And then I found myself talking about it with 3 or 4 different people at different times at Yellow, like just coming up in conversation. And with most things that I create, like be that art, be that writing, I don't really like it after a couple of years. So I look back and think, nah, don't really like that anymore. I probably wouldn't write another book. I wrote a book back in 2011 that I just don't really like it anymore. It was of the time. It's how I was thinking and how I wanted to write at the time. But yeah, stuff's changed a lot since then. But it's still available because people buy it and they seem to like it. But I noticed that when I'd been talking recently about this article, I still really liked it. It still felt really important to me. So I thought that given all the ways it suddenly started to pop up recently, that maybe I should rewrite it and share it a bit more wider, because I'd lost the original writing that I'd done. And the original article was written as a way of answering the question that I'm often asked of, what is your process? I think a lot of creative people get asked that, what is your creative process? And lots of people can answer that. But for me, genuinely, I don't know. My answer is I don't know what it is. And I sort of don't want to work out what it is, because I fear that if I work out what it is, it will no longer be what it is, if that makes any sense. And I'm also very allergic to like formula or structures or things that we would repeat to do with creativity. And often to my own disadvantage. I probably find things a lot easier if I did actually do that. But there's something important about things not reifying and solidifying and staying mysterious and amorphous for me. But there definitely is a pattern about how I perceive the world and how I approach things, I think. And I'm more interested in that philosophies and patternings rather than formulas. So instead of writing a guide to creativity, when I wrote this original article, I decided to entitle the piece 4 Lightly Held Philosophies for Living a Creative Life. And I was really intentional about calling that, because they are philosophies. They're not formulas. They're things to explore, to chew over, to feel what resonates, to make your own. And the lightly held is to hold them lightly. I think quite often when we start to experience something that maybe liberates ourselves creatively, we then cling on to it so much we do the equivalent of spiritual bypassing, where we're just obsessing with the thing to the point that it's taking us further away from what the thing was supposed to be enabling. So yeah, 4 lightly held philosophies for living a creative life. And I share them here because they might be useful. Take what's useful and discard the rest. Philosophy number 1 is to be fascinated. And I use that word fascinated very, very intentionally. An artist's job is to be fascinated. And I'm using the word artist because I can't think of a better word. And that could be the art of anything, spontaneous creative expression. It could be a painting, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be the way you parent, it could be the way you cross the road. I'm not getting hung up on that definition there. But an artist's job is to be fascinated, utterly, utterly fascinated, like a deep fascination that's embedded in wonder and mystery. And I use that word to differentiate between the idea of being fascinated and being interested. To be interested is something very different to me. Like, I'm interested in sharks. I've been interested in sharks since I was a kid. But I don't feel compelled to spend my life traveling around the world studying them or taking risks to getting close to them or using up finite and limited resources, time, money, energy of studying sharks. I'm just interested in them. And for me, interests are fleeting. They come and go. But to be fascinated is something different. When I'm fascinated, I cannot not pursue that fascination. It's like I don't have a choice in it. It's so fascinating that it starts to consume my attention. And the thing is, when I find a deep fascination with something, there's no need to motivate myself towards action or summon up courage and bravery and energy to do something. When I do my bingo machine talk about my weird and wonky projects, quite often people say there's a lot of bravery or courage in your work. And whilst I get why people are saying that, that's not my experience. It always is. I'm just so fascinated by it. I cannot not do it. I don't have to summon up courage or bravery with something that I'm that fascinated in. It's just like the deep wonder and curiosity that fascination generates is enough momentum to trigger me into action and exploration and experimentation. And it's simply my job to follow that fascination or at least not get in its way or not let life things get in its way. For me, being fascinated is to pursue questions and not answers. It's to work out what is the question behind the question, and each question leads to a bigger question behind it. And to regard answers as dead ends or wrong turns, to regard an exclamation mark as a question mark with rigor mortis, that we've reached an end point where all the life's drained out of it. Whereas a fascination is just like a fractal. We keep on becoming more and more fascinated. And to be fascinated is to give yourself permission to be wholly consumed by that thing that fascinates you. And to take risks to explore that fascination, to experiment, to allow yourself to spend every waking moment being fascinated. And that can happen to such an extent that the dissenting voices, be they internal dissenting voices or external dissenting voices, they sort of don't matter because you're so fascinated by this thing. In 2018, I became fascinated by the curious question, I wonder what the opposite of a podcast would be. And I remember this came to me while I was running. And it happened because someone had sent a tweet about a leadership podcast. And it said, all the secrets to leadership that the top leaders want you to know. And like actionable insights. And here's your 5-step formula to blah, 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 blah. And I just thought, not another one of those. It's like, do we have too many podcasts already? Do we really need another one? And do we really need another one about that? Now, I'm being really hypocritical here and inconsistent. This is a podcast, possibly, that you're listening to, and I like podcasts. So the question wasn't about being anti-podcast. It was more about what is happening with podcasts. And the default of having a podcast was what everyone was doing at the time. So everyone should do it, even if they have nothing to say. And I wanted to mess with this, so I thought, I wonder what the opposite of a podcast would be. And to cut a long story short, I created Sound of Silence, which was the world's first silent podcast featuring special guests. It was almost the world's first silent podcast, but the Quakers beat me to it with that one about a month earlier. But Sound of Silence was the world's first silent podcast featuring special guests. And I recorded 100 episodes over the period of 2.5 years, and every week would broadcast silence. I recorded face-to-face with a special guest. And I had some amazing adventures and met some amazing people. I met some of my heroes, people like Vic Reeves, like David Shrigley. I travelled and drank soup with former Beirut hostage Terry Waite, and we spoke about peace and religion and war and philosophy, and then we recorded nothing for 2 minutes and then carried on in this amazing conversation. And it was an incredible adventure that came from my fascination. And it was an adventure that cost me a lot of time, money, effort and energy that I didn't have at the time. But I couldn't not do it because I was so fascinated. And the artifact of that fascination is what became a weirdly popular cult podcast. And if you want to listen to the 100 episodes of Silence, you can go to soundofsilence.org.uk. But my point is, fascination lies at the heart of this. Fascination lies at the heart of living a creative life. And to be fascinated is to tune into the underlying mystery and the magic and wonder of the human experience, of our moment-by-moment experience. And the way we tune into this fascination is to not try hard to find out what it is, but letting go and allowing ourselves to hear the quiet and alluring questions and fascinations that are just calling for our attention and allowing ourselves to move towards them. Philosophy 2 is to create windows into your world. And this comes from the idea that fascinated people are fascinating. Somebody who's in the grips of being utterly fascinated by something is utterly compelling to other people. And I learned this in 2012 when I was training with the legendary theatre director Keith Johnson. It was when I was writing about spontaneity and learning to perform improvisation. And Keith set up an exercise in which one at a time we had to walk on stage and do something that would keep the audience engaged. And the audience were instructed in very Johnstonian style that the moment they started to lose interest, the moment they started to feel bored by what the person was doing, they had to get up and walk out the room. And this was a class of about 35 to 40 people. So it was very visible, noisy feedback when people got up to leave. And many of us tried this and lasted around, 10, 20 seconds. I remember as I watched a few people, I thought, I've got a great idea of what I'm going to do. I'm going to go up and do this. Everyone will love it. No one's going to leave. And then after about 8 or 9 seconds, everyone got up and went. And I felt crushed and disappointed and useless. But then one guy got up and captivated us, even though he wasn't doing much. He was just sort of looking at the floorboards. And I remember he sort of went down on his knees and was looking at something and didn't really know what it was. But it captivated us. It completely captivated us. And he lasted about 1.5 minutes before people started getting up and leaving, which was bizarre. I remember watching him and thinking, I sort of want to leave because this should be boring, but I'm genuinely interested in him. And at the end of the exercise, Keith debriefed and he said what happened is he went up and was simply being interested. He was being genuinely interested in the holes in the floor and the way that the floorboards joined together. Not acting interested, he was being interested. And Keith said the rest of you went up and tried to be interesting, but it doesn't work like that. Interested people are interesting. And I took Keith's philosophy there and adapted it for myself to make it fascinated people are fascinating. And this second philosophy of creating windows into your world is simply finding ways in which people can experience you being fascinated by whatever you're fascinated by. And this philosophy runs counter to much of the advice about how we are taught to market or share our work creatively or in any part of life, I guess. And it seems that most of the advice that I've received that hasn't worked for me is we have to put in a lot of effort and structure to market our passion and create content to share, to show that we're interesting, to show that we're fascinating. And that just takes away from valuable resources and time that we could have been used to just be fascinated. And I know a number of artists that have a really big Instagram following, a really big social media following, TikTok following, which is great for them and it works for them. And they spend so much time creating content. And for me, I don't want to spend time creating content. I want to be being fascinated. So this idea of creating windows into your world turns all of that on its head, and it casts aside the idea that it's our responsibility to sell and promote our work. And instead, it just invites us to simply create cracks in the third wall, little windows that people can wander past and look in and see us being fascinated. We're doing whatever we're doing, whether anyone walks past or looks in. And some people will walk past and peer in and carry on walking. I think it's not for them, which I've actually found a really helpful way when something doesn't engage people. I feel less personally crushed by it. It's just they look in and it wasn't for them. Like I walk past hundreds of shops and don't go in. And when I look in the window, I don't think that breaks the hearts of everyone in that shop. I don't know, maybe it does, who knows. But some people will become so fascinated that they'll keep coming back to the window and keep looking in. And they maybe will climb through the window and join you or invite you to go somewhere and be fascinated with them and might pay you for your fascination. So this philosophy completely changed my relationship with social media in particular, particularly Instagram. I never make things to show on Instagram. There's a few occasions where I have done and it's made me miserable and no one's liked it. Instead, Instagram is just a window into my world, a window that you can look through and see what I'm doing. And I'd be doing it anyway, whether you're looking or not. A window to look in and see what I'm fascinated by at that point in time. And it might fascinate you. If not, that's fine. But a window can be anything that you want it to be. In social media and websites are an example, but in my experience, they're a very limited one because a massive amount of people have social media accounts. And whilst it creates a window, it's a bit like going down to Canary Wharf in London, Docklands, where you've got the huge skyscrapers with hundreds of windows. And there's so many windows, you can't possibly look in all of them. Then you bring in things like algorithms that act as traffic police that point you towards particular windows that have content that they want you to see, or content that increases the amount of time on the platform, or content that people have paid for. So social media is a window, is an important window, but is a limited window in my experience. So a window could be a blog, it could be a workshop that you run, it could be a talk that you give, or it could even be an actual window into your office or your studio. My studio in Kingston, I realised that I didn't get it because it had a big window that everyone walks past when they go into the building. But I've realised, actually, no, that's a really good window because people walk in and there's this weird world I've created in there that people are fascinated by. And I quite often meet people that I've not met in the studio before, and they say, I look in your studio every time I walk past and just think, what? And over the last 5 years or so, I've experimented with creating all sorts of windows into my world. Weird talks where I'm just telling stories about what I'm fascinated by at that moment. Public art installations that have no explanation and quite often don't have any direct, overt connection to me. Or just in the spontaneous everyday conversations that I have with people where I share more about what I'm fascinated by at that point in time rather than what do I do to earn money. Or sitting painting sticks in the park with a sign saying free sticks, please take one, which I just found is an amazing way to immerse myself in something fascinating and meet other people and engage with other people. But a couple of important things here is all windows are experiments and we never know who's going to look in, or how many people will look in, or how visible they'll be. But the important thing here is that this window philosophy allows all of your attention, or the majority of your attention and energy, to be devoted to the thing that you're being fascinated by, and not taking away from that because you have to market it. Philosophy number 3 is to learn to live below your means. And I read somewhere many years ago that often quoted advice of simply follow your passion is problematic if you also want lots of nice things. And I think I may have read that in one of Austin Kleon's books, but I went through them recently just to see if I could find it, and I couldn't. But I'm pretty sure it come from him. But wherever I read it, it stuck with me for a long time. Not like some sort of demotivating, hopeless, pathetic mantra, but a helpful articulation of how the world in which we live, or at least the world in which I live, is predisposed to a particular model of what it means to be a productive and successful human being. I mean, for me, it can feel like if I don't have a clear plan of how to turn my fascination into profit or growth, or have a big goal at the end, or able to monetize it, then I'm deficient in some way, that there's no point in doing it. And if expressing our spontaneous creative self doesn't translate into some sort of progress or commercial achievement, then it should be relegated to being a hobby, a hobby that there's only time for where the urgent and productive work has been attended to. And I find that the concept of hobbies simultaneously lovely and sinister and sad for those reasons. At the same time, though, it's important for our basic sustenance and well-being to be able to earn a living and build some sense of security, be that a roof over our heads, food, sustenance, shelter. And many artists that I've spoken to say, "Oh, I don't care about the money," which is a noble statement, and I'm not motivated by the money. But at the same time, the money is important. We need to be able to earn to survive. And artists should be paid for their work. We should be paid for our weird and wonky creative work. When I first painted sticks in Regent's Park, one of the most frequent questions that I get asked is, "What are you doing this for?" Or "What are you hoping to achieve from this?" And occasionally I get some unsolicited advice that I should start selling sticks and set up an Etsy shop to make some money, make a little bit of money for myself. And the truth is, I was painting sticks because I was bored, lonely, and house sitting in Camden. I only had a little bit of paint, and there's a load of sticks in Regent's Park, and it fascinated me sitting there all day doing that. And I was doing it just for nice. I was doing it for no other reason than just for nice. And just for nice, I'd forgotten about that phrase. Just for nice, it's a phrase that came from the Pennsylvanian Dutch, and I think I first heard it in an Alan Watts lecture many years ago. And it refers to an activity or a thing having no purpose other than being just for nice. And I think the example that Alan Watts used was, you don't walk into someone's house and there's a beautiful vase of flowers on the table, and you don't walk in and say, "What's the tangible return on investment of that?" Or "What's that there for?" Or "What do you hope to achieve by that?" They're just for nice. They're just for nice. They don't need any other reason than to be just for nice. So the important thing for me to hold in this philosophy of learning to live below my means is that I'm aware that who I am and where I'm from and my age and gender and other factors mean that my means are greater than others. And also my means will be less than others. So living below our means is contextually and economically different for people that live in all different circumstances. And it's important for me to continually acknowledge that, whilst at the same time asking myself the question, what is enough? What is enough? What is enough that I can carry on being fascinated and not be distracted from my fascination? And through doing this, I'm continually learning to let go of anything more than enough to create space for spontaneous self-expression. And most of that spontaneous self-expression doesn't directly lead to monetary rewards, but some of it, sometimes indirectly over time, does, in ways that I couldn't have possibly designed. And the final philosophy, this feels like it's taken a lot longer to go through than it did to write, so hopefully if it's of interest. But philosophy 4, hang out with other weirdos. And this is really important, because if we spend our time being fascinated and opening windows into our world and making maybe strange decisions about our lives that mean we live below our means so we can dedicate ourselves to something that doesn't clearly have a return on investment, it can become a bit of a lonely place. Particularly if everyone around us is working in a more structured and traditionally effective and efficient way, it can feel like we've lost the plot a little. And over the years I've been attempting to live my life in this way, there's been many moments where I just thought it'd be so much easier to return to the world of normal. I'm doing normal in inverted commas. It's like financially and psychologically and motivationally that would feel a lot easier. It can feel like somewhat of an isolating experience if we're choosing to live our lives in a way that's counter to norms, to counter to what society and our friends and family regard as normal. And we can feel like we're going insane when things get hard or complicated, or we resort to somewhat desperate measures to make ends meet or to cope with uncertainty. about a year and a half ago, I had to sell every bit of musical equipment I've got, instrument, guitars, pedals, mixing desks and that, because it just got to a point that I needed to do that. And I needed to do that in order to help live below my means. So the importance of finding other weirdos to hang out with is critical for our emotional, our psychological well-being and our resilience in doing all of this. To seek out and hang out with others who are experimenting with living their lives in a similar way. Now, it might not be exactly the same, but other people that are just finding ways to nurture their fascination. So whilst the other three philosophies are important, and they happen in that order for me, the heart of it is to be fascinated and then to create windows, to live below our means. This one is the sustainable element of it. This is what builds resilience in doing this. And having an understanding and empathic group of fellow weirdos is so important for this. And the weirdo or the outsider can be a comforter or a kindred spirit or an encourager or a darer or just someone to listen or someone to look at and think, well, I'm not as weird as them. But they can also be a huge inspiration. And I think over the years I've been inspired by more weirdos and outsiders than I have by experts and authorities in every element of my life. So they're my 4 philosophies from that original article that I wrote about in the first Substack. Be fascinated, create windows into your world, learn to live below your means, hang out with other weirdos. So also on the Substack, I mention upcoming workshops, but I don't know if it's helpful to do that on here, because you might be listening to this the day after it comes out. You might be listening to this in a year's time. Who knows? But if you go to my website, www.canscorpionsmoke.com, you can see what workshops I've got going on. And I know at the moment there's a musical improvisation workshop with the lovely Heather and Joe and myself. And there's also a mask workshop. The mask workshops are my favourite workshops to run. They're limited to just 10 people. And I can only do maybe 4 a year because they're brilliant and they exhaust me. But go to the website and have a look on there. And also in the Substack, I mention my shop. I give my shop a plug. I have an online shop that sells prints and books and badges and T-shirts and all sorts of stuff. And I've just started stocking some new screen print T-shirts and some big posters, one of which is called Existential Apple and the other which is called Happy Art. So that's it. Wow, that's about 35 minutes. I hope it's been of interest. I will do this for each edition of the Substack, and I'll try and catch up so I release them simultaneously. And the thing that's doing my head in at the moment, like really confusing me and frying my brain, is that you're listening to the first episode of the podcast, but I don't mention the fact that this podcast exists until the 3rd edition of the Substack. And it's like, I don't know how I'm going to match that up or how I'm going to align that. And I'm just letting that fry my brain for a bit, and we'll work it out at some time. But these will come out once a month, and yeah, I hope it's been of interest. Thank you for listening.